Today, I wanted to talk about CRT, and thank you, Trevor, for that wonderful introduction. Uh, and and so, as I was thinking about this presentation, um, it is about culturally relevant teaching, but since it's the same initials, it also made me think about critical race theory. And as earlier mentioned by one of our dual credit instructors in the state of Texas, they've outlawed teaching CRT, uh, the other CRT, critical race theory. So first, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about culturally relevant teaching or culturally relevant pedagogy, which is a term that was actually proposed by Professor Gloria Ladson Billings, and I this is one of her books, The Dream Keepers, Successful Teachers of African American Students. And with PASOS, I think we're doing a lot of the things that Professor Ladson Billings talks about are good culturally relevant practices with the stories and everything. And so in her book, this is kind of like a good summary of CRT, culturally relevant teaching. If you're doing culturally relevant teaching, you see yourself as an artist. Teaching is an art, and so often I see myself as the sage on the stage. I don't know. Sometimes I think it's just me, but my students sometimes don't look so interested, and so I try to tap dance. I try to get them engaged, but I think it's COVID that's kind of taken a toll on us. But as a teacher that's trying to practice culturally relevant teaching, you see yourself as an artist, not as a technician. You see yourself as part of the community, and teaching is giving back to the community. And you also encourage your students to do the same. Uh, and so, in an assimilationist point of view, the teacher would see themselves as education as a way of maybe getting out of the community, not giving back. And as a culturally relevant teacher, you have high expectations, and you think all students can succeed. And often, maybe this happens to us when we're in meetings, and you see that some of your colleagues might have deficit point of view of the students, and so a teacher that's an assimilationist believes that failure is inevitable for some students. Whereas a teacher with culturally relevant teaching practices feels that everybody can succeed. I think back to a quote by or to a story by Lani Guinier. She actually just passed. She was a professor of law, and she talked about um, going into the army. You come with some qualifications, and we come out a soldier. Whereas other people think that maybe education is like modeling. You have to be 6 feet tall. You have to be a certain weight and look a certain way in order to make it. And so I think in education we can mold our students into being successful. And again, a culturally relevant teacher helps students make connections between community, national, and global identities, whereas a teacher with an assimilationist point of view just sees one identity, one American identity. And a teacher with culturally relevant practices uh, teaches and pulls out knowledge, like mining, whereas a teacher with assimilationist practices is often doing banking, just putting in information into their students and taking it out as well, but not learning from her students or his or her students. And so those are some of the basic tenets of CRT, uh, and and so uh, the reason that I also wanted to mention critical race theory is that eventually Professor Ladson Billings does move into using critical race theory uh, in education as well. And so critical race theory originates from critical legal studies. So this is from the late 1970s at Harvard. There's a professor named Derek Bell who was one of the few African American professors at Harvard, and him, along with some of his graduate school students, who then later on became professors like Kimberly Crenshaw, um, Mary Matsuda, came up with critical race theory. And so critical race theory, and here I apologize for the small font size, is look, these are some of the tenets of critical race theory. And in graduate school, I actually did take a class on critical race theory from David Theo Goldberg. So the text in red was the one that we used for that class. This other book is more contemporary, and so critical race theory does look at racism, and it does look uh, that that's the experience of people of color in the U.S. And then secondary, it does look at white supremacy and how that has manifested in the country. And then the third theme is that race is a social construction. And so uh, the biologist, I don't know if there's any biologist in the room, but they know that there's no such thing as race biologically, but race does exist in the, let me see if I can zoom it. Somebody's asking me to zoom. Oh, here it is. Okay, so biologically race doesn't exist, but it exists for the purposes of uh, historically, certain identities have been prescribed to certain groups, right? And so, slavery. If you were, uh, and this has also been constructed by the law. So, for example, in Louisiana, one drop of black blood meant that you were African. And so, I teach government, so in class when I talk about Plessy versus Ferguson, I talk about how Plessy had 1/8 black ancestry. He had one black grandfather, but because of that, he was considered black by the state of Louisiana. And so there are identities prescribed to people based on what they look like. And us living here on the border, we face this every day. So I always make sure that I have identification with me, right? Because I'm a brown woman, and depending, and especially when I travel, when I go to the airport, I try to not look, I try to dress up, right? Because I do worry that maybe the border patrol is going to stop me. They do have, and maybe you're thinking, she's exaggerating. But when I went to graduate school in New York City, my cousins, my brother and my cousin came to my graduation, and they were stopped by the border patrol in the El Paso airport because they're two young Latino men going to New York City. So automatically they thought maybe they were undocumented workers, right? And so for us, we face this in living in the border all the time. And so and think of August 3rd, that person drove 10 hours to come to the Walmart to shoot Mexicans. And so, so some people like to think that we've evolved in race or that we're in a post-racial society. We did have Obama, right? We've had a black president, but that doesn't necessarily mean that things are 100% equal for everybody. And so that's kind of what critical race theory is trying to look at. And so the idea of racialization. And so think about Latinos under Trump. We were having young families separated and being held in Clint, and we had uh, Latinos from other parts Mexico and other parts of Latin America being held in corrals under the freeway. And so, so critical race theory can serve as a good vehicle to analyze these things. But it's usually something that is discussed more in a graduate class. So this comes from legal studies, but this is one of the books that you could look at. Richard Delgado and Stefanik. I took this tenet from their 2017 book, Critical Race Theory, third edition. And for us, since most of us are EPCC folks, this is available as an ebook, and so you can read it at your own leisure, and not even spend money on it. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about critical race theory, like what it is. And so we probably wouldn't even go there in K through 12 education, but it's become something that has become taboo. And then from critical race theory, there have been some other uh, educators that also have branched out. So there's Latino critical race theory, there's Asian critical race theory. This is from Dolores Delgado Bernal, and she's a professor at Cal State LA, formerly at the University of Utah. And so uh, she talks about Latino critical race theory as borrowing from different approaches: ethnic studies, women's studies, emphasizing on experiential knowledge. And so here, and I can see where this can relate to the English disciplines, Dr. Campa's presentation. We use our own experience. We use stories, narratives, testimonials, oral histories to illuminate the challenges and experiences of students of color. And it's a challenge to the dominant ideologies. And so perhaps, if and I noticed that when I mentioned the story about the Border Patrol, someone else chimed in that happened to them, right? And so this is kind of acknowledging that these things happen, whereas maybe another narrative would be that that we're in modern times and racism doesn't exist anymore. And so this challenges the centrality of race and racism and intersectionality, right? Because we're not just women, we're also a product of all of our experiences, right? We have class, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, all these things play into one. And Latino critical race theory also wants to see social justice and social change. And so that's a little bit about Lat critical race theory. And I wanted to tie it in with one of the first questions at the beginning of the presentation. That as teachers in K through 12 or our dual credit folks can't talk about race. And so I actually wanted to share with you this new anti-critical race theory law, HB 3979. And so here, my government perspective, right? And so if you're teaching about the war with Ukraine and Russia, you're breaking the law, right? And so as a K through 12 teacher, you're prohibited from discussing current events or anything controversial dealing with social affairs. That's actually in the law. And if you are discussing it, maybe you need to give a balanced point of view. And this is where where it does become controversial. So if you're teaching about the Holocaust, you have to give the Hitler point of view as well. So maybe if you're teaching about Russia, you should also give the Russian point of view as well, right? Because they want you to give different perspectives, even though what we might think one perspective is wrong, right? But here you're supposed to share both, right? And so that becomes controversial. The pros of the Holocaust, the pros of slavery, the pros of this invasion, like what and again here. I think back to a quote by a Holocaust survivor, Eli Eli Wenzel, and he talked about when you're neutral, you're taking the side of the oppressor. When you don't take a point of view, uh, you know, I don't so right now they're committing genocide against the whole country. I'm neutral on that issue. And neutrality only serves the oppressor, right? And so, and third, like in case you didn't know, you can't offer extra credit or award credit for a student being politically active, lobbying, or persuading members of the legislature or executive branch at the federal, state, or local level through direct communication. So you can't have an assignment asking your students. I actually do this assignment, but I'm not in K-12, right? Where I have them write a letter to the editor supposing or opposing a political candidate. We just had primary elections. But again, I let them pick their own candidate from whatever party. And this is developing critical thinking because I have them analyze the candidate, why they support them, why they don't. If I was in K-12, I'd be breaking the law because although I don't have them send it to the El Paso Times, so maybe because it's just an in-class assignment, I could still get away with it. But again, but this is also not allowed. And requiring participation in an internship, practicum, or similar activity involving social or public policy advocacy. So sometimes in the past, I've done service learning. Pre-COVID, I would have students volunteer at a nonprofit organization and give them credit for that. If I was doing this as a dual credit faculty, I wouldn't be allowed to do that because that's also participation. And then, and again here, I apologize, but and so what else are you not supposed to be doing? Teaching that one race is inherently superior to the other, teaching that an individual's race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously, uh, teaching that people bear responsibilities for actions committed in the past by members of their race or sex, teaching something that would make someone feel uncomfortable, guilty, anguish, or cause psychological distress because of a person's race or sex. And then not teaching that the meritocracy or hard work are racist, sexist, created by members of a particular race to oppress another group. And so, for example, some of these standardized tests were put in to keep, like for example, the SAT was put in to keep Jewish people out of universities, right? And but I wouldn't be able to teach that if I was in K-12. And then when we talk about slavery, we're also supposed to teach that it's just a failure to live up to the authentic founding principles of the U.S., which include liberty or equality. So the 3/5 rule, the fact that slavery was allowed, it's just it wasn't about slavery. I guess it was just the lack of us living up to the founding principles of the US. So again, they put all of this in, and this is kind of a reaction to something called the 1619 Project, which teaches about slavery, and there's a book associated with that. So we're not allowed to teach about that either, and you're not allowed to have a curriculum or PD discussing this. So but I think since we're at the college level, we're still allowed to have this presentation. But I did want to, but it's not all bad news. And so at the House level, there are people that are maybe not as right wing as others. So you can teach this, and this is actually in the law. So here, and again, I put this for our dual credit people, and just for informational purposes, like what can be in the law. And so you can still teach about the Chicano movement, women's suffrage and equal rights, the civil rights movement, the labor movement. Here, perhaps whoever wrote this bill has never heard of Asian people or of the LGBT movement, because those are not there. So I don't know if they would necessarily be allowed or not. But then you could still teach about Martin Luther King, about the Civil Rights Amendment, about the Brown versus Board of Education, uh, and the Emancipation Proclamation. And so Mendes versus Westminster, and Frederick Douglass, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta. And this all comes from the legislature's bill analysis. And so, so I wanted you to know that it's not all bad news, that there's still, that whoever wrote this bill on the House side made sure that there's still, so perhaps for our dual credit folks, if somebody tattles on you, oh, we learned about the Chicano movement, you can go back to the law and see that it's still there. So yeah, so glad there are still defenders of history in the legislature, right? And so, uh, in continuation, what else can be taught? Uh, the importance of the Voting Rights Act, the 19th Amendment, the 26th Amendment, uh, Dr. Hector P. Garcia. And so uh, a couple of years ago, I was actually on the Social Studies TEACS committee, and Dr. Garcia was the founder of the American GI Forum, and this is a civil rights group for Latino vets. And so you can still teach about LULAC and Hernandez versus Texas. And so this is in the law. So just in case you hadn't, gone through it with a fine tooth comb, this is actually there. And so, so as history teachers, social studies teachers, even in English, don't feel like everything is lost. And so I can share that if people are interested, the bill tracking assignment, or share where I got this information. And then here, this actually came up in our faculty senate meeting. So Dan Patrick, he's the lieutenant governor of the state of Texas, and the new thing he wants to do is he wants to end tenure at Texas colleges and universities for all new hires. And if you were teaching critical race theory, make it a grounds for revoking tenure. And so as faculty members, we know that tenure is there to protect you from to protect us from being able to discuss and be critical of the government, of people, of ideas. And so our lieutenant governor, though, feels, that it should only be, yes, it's not only in the high schools. He wants, now we're next. And so what trickles from the high schools, trickles up into the universities. And so this is a quote by him. And, let me zoom it, right? And he just won his primary. And so I will not stand and let loony Marxist UT professors poison the minds of young students with critical race theory. We banned it in K-12. We will ban it in higher ed. That's why we created the Liberty Institute at UT. And so he gave this as a tweet as a result of the president of the UT Faculty Senate kind of talking about the importance of academic freedom. And so so I wanted to mention critical race theory because, we should talk about Bruno. Both critical race theory and critical pedagogy are useful in teaching. And so at the K-12 level, it's been demonized in 22 states. And so even though it's something very complex that we wouldn't necessarily be teaching at the younger grade levels. And so, like I mentioned, I know that I just taught the chapter on voting last week, and it's hard not to talk about race when we're talking about poll taxes, about the white primary, about voting discrimination. And so it's made a challenge for us, but I do feel that perhaps we should be worried. And so here, I'm gonna ask, how am I doing on time? I'm gonna ask tech support to see if they would share a video. So there was actually a person, an African American principal here in Texas, who was forced to resign because they said he was teaching Black Lives Matter. And so we're gonna share the video now.
Let's go.
Dr. James Whitfield is at the center of a national fight this morning as he prepares to defend himself in a public hearing next month in Texas.
I'd be lying if I told you that it didn't pain me to not be with the students that I typically get to serve each day.
Since late August, he's been suspended from his job as the first Black principal of Texas's majority-white Colleyville Heritage High School after accusations that he was pushing critical race theory, or CRT, on students. Texas is one of 8 states with new laws banning the teaching of critical race theory, a decades-old graduate-level study of law and racial inequality, which some claim can make white students feel guilt.
We should be teaching American pride, not to hate our country and to hate each other.
But teachers and school officials tell NBC News that critical race theory was never taught by Dr. Whitfield or anyone else at the school. Some students have staged protests and walkouts.
They fired the best principal that any of us have ever had in our entire life.
State Senator Brian Hughes is the author of Senate Bill 3, the second anti-CRT law passed in Texas.
We're not going to teach that one race is inherently superior or inferior, or that one sex is inherently superior or inferior. We're not going to teach that in K through 12 in Texas.
When you look at some of what's happening around the state right now, you don't think that any of this has gone off the rails?
Well, I think folks need to focus on what's in the bill and not what's in other states or what they've heard or things like that.
In a statement to NBC News, the Grapevine Colleyville School District said Whitfield violated district policies, and they proposed the non-renewal of Dr. Whitfield's contract due to deficiencies in his performance as principal.
The school district says that what's happened to you has nothing to do with critical race theory. Has this all just been a misunderstanding?
So it is interesting that they would say that. Promoted me twice in the last 3 years. What's changed?
Have a great day, buddy.
Every morning, Whitfield takes his 9-year-old son Landon to school. It's across the street from where just a few weeks ago, he was principal.
It's almost defeating. I'm driving back home. It feels like I'm missing out on doing what I've been called to do.
Just this week, this state next door, Oklahoma, got hit with the first ever federal lawsuit against an anti-CRT law. The ACLU, which filed the claim, says that the law violates free speech. As for Dr. Whitfield, he's going to be in a hearing in front of his school board on November 9th. Savannah.
All right, Antonia Hilton, thank you. And for more on the textbook wars, you can tune into NBC.
And so I wanted to share that because, so sometimes we like to think that it's politics doesn't matter or it's theoretical. But if we don't vote, conferences like this one might be illegal by next year. And so it might make people feel uncomfortable, but it's, but if first, if they consider this, and culturally relevant teaching is not critical race theory, but to them, anything talking about race is critical race theory, even though it's not, but they've never taken graduate classes in critical race theory, so they don't know, and they just, anything that talks about race, they demonize. And so there's lots of comments that have been shared in the chat that I've been sometimes seeing, but not really reading because I'm trying to focus. But I wanted to end with a quote by Mary Matsuda, who's a Harvard grad and one of the founders of critical race theory, and also a professor at the University of Hawaii. And this was an article from the New York Times that she said, "For me, critical race theory is a method that takes the lived experience of racism seriously, using history and social reality to explain how racism operates in American law and culture towards the end of eliminating harmful effects of racism and bringing about a just and healthy world for all." And so, so now it's gotten a lot of play because of this anti-CRT CRT bills around the country. But it's also to talk about the effects of racism long term, right? And so I would suggest that well, those of you in K to 12, you can encourage us to vote, but for those of us in higher ed, encourage students to become more aware, and so that they can know what's going on. But